Story 1. Last winter, I went camping alone with my dog Roscoe, and it's something I'm never doing again. I had taken a few days off work, and I wanted to be away from people for a bit. I packed up my truck with my gear and drove up this long, narrow trail that ran deep into a state forest. The road looked like it barely ever got attention. Packed snow, slick ice, and no sign that many vehicles used it. I didn't pass a single car the whole time. After close to an hour of driving, I pulled into a small pull-off that looked like it had been forgotten about. From there, I grabbed my pack and started hiking, with Roscoe trotting beside me. About 20 minutes in, I found a small clearing surrounded by thick trees. The snow was deep and clean, like nothing had crossed it in a long time. No footprints, no tracks that looked fresh. No hint anyone had been nearby recently. That was exactly what I wanted. I dropped my pack, stomped out a spot for my tent, and let Roscoe wander while I worked. He stayed close, weaving through the trees and sniffing at the snow, bouncing around like he was having the time of his life. I got the tent up, drove the stakes in hard because the ground was frozen solid, and laid out my sleeping pad and my winter sleeping bag inside. I knew the temperature was going to be brutal, well below freezing, so I didn't mess around with layers. Thermal base layers, heavy socks, a fleece, and my thick jacket stayed on even after camp was set up. Once the tent was ready, I collected dead wood and put together a small fire pit. When I got the fire going, I let it settle into a steady burn, then cooked a simple dinner over it. I ate sitting on a log, staring out at the trees, while Roscoe laid near the fire. The forest was quiet in that deep winter way where everything feels muted. My dad told me a long time ago that snow can absorb sound, and out there, it really felt like the woods were swallowing every little noise. After I finished eating, Roscoe suddenly got up and started barking toward the trees. At first, I didn't think much of it. Deer were common out there, and he'd barked at them before. I told him to calm down, and after a minute he did, sitting back down like nothing happened. I checked the time and decided I'd stay by the fire a little longer before turning in. Whenever I camped in remote places like that, I carried a handgun, and it was on my side like it always was. At that moment, I still felt fine. About 20 minutes later, Roscoe started up again, this time louder, more aggressive, and then I heard what he was reacting to. Footsteps. They weren't close at first, just the sound of someone moving through snow somewhere out in the trees. I stood up immediately and listened. The steps stopped. Then they started again. Roscoe shifted from barking to this low growl, and then he went completely quiet. He stood rigid, staring into the dark. That's when the uneasy feeling really hit me. I followed the direction he was locked onto, and I saw a shape at the edge of the tree line. Someone was standing there, half swallowed by the shadows, only barely touched by the firelight. I called out, trying to sound normal, and said something along the lines of how he startled me, and I told Roscoe it was okay. The figure didn't move right away. Then he stepped forward just enough for me to see it was a man. He asked what I was doing out there, that far into the woods. The way he said it didn't feel casual or friendly. I told him I was just out there to get some time in nature, just me and my dog. He didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, watching me, like he was sizing me up. I could feel the mood shifting, like the situation was sliding into something I didn't want. I told him, as calmly as I could, that I was armed. He gave this small laugh and made a comment, like it was strange that I'd warn him instead of welcoming him, like I should be inviting him to sit down with me. And he asked where my hospitality was. And then, without another word, he turned around and walked back into the darkness. His steps faded until I couldn't hear him anymore. I stood there for a long time, staring into the trees, waiting to see if he'd come back. Roscoe stayed pressed close to my legs. I hated everything about it, but after a while, I tried to convince myself he was gone for good. I put out the fire carefully, dumping snow onto it and stirring the ashes until there was nothing left that could glow. The last thing I wanted was a light source drawing attention to my exact spot. Then I crawled into my tent and sealed it up. Inside, I focused on staying warm. I laid the sleeping pad down so the frozen ground wouldn't pull the heat out of me. I stayed dressed, pulled a knit hat on, and tightened the sleeping bag around my shoulders. I kept one hand warmer near my core and another down by my feet. Roscoe curled up beside me, and his body heat honestly helped more than anything else. I lay there listening to the woods, or more accurately, listening to the total absence of sound. After a while, Roscoe started growling again, and then I heard it, the same thing as before. Footsteps in the snow. They stopped, and Roscoe went quiet, but I could tell he was still on high alert. His ears were up, his body tense. Then the footsteps started again, closer this time, and slower. Whoever it was walked right up to the tent and stopped. Roscoe started howling, loud enough that my heart jumped. I whispered at him to stop, terrified he was going to draw more attention. When he finally did stop, he dropped back into that low, steady growl. The person didn't leave. They just stood outside the tent. I could hear tiny movements, like a slight shift of weight, boots pressing into snow, that kind of thing. I had my gun in my hand at that point, but I didn't want to go beyond that. I didn't want to start making threats and then be forced into doing something I couldn't take back. I've never shot anyone. I've never wanted to. And even thinking about having to do it, even in self-defense, made me feel sick. Eventually, I couldn't handle it anymore. I cocked the gun and said clearly that I had a gun and that whoever was outside needed to leave right now. And realistically, who else would it be besides the same guy from earlier? For a few seconds, there was nothing, just silence. Then I heard footsteps again, backing away from the tent. Slow at first, then quicker, and then they disappeared into the woods. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't look out. I just stayed frozen there for what felt like hours. Roscoe stayed alert the entire time. And honestly, that was the only reason I eventually felt even slightly safe enough to drift off. If I'd been out there alone, I don't think I would have slept at all. Even with him, I only managed short, shallow bursts of sleep. When the sky finally started to lighten, I packed everything up as fast as I could. At the first hint of morning, we hiked back to my truck and got out of there. I've never gone back to that part of the woods, and I never will. People like that don't just ruin a trip. They make you realize how thin the line is between a quiet night and something much worse, and how you can't ever fully relax even when you think you're completely alone. Story 2. July 4th weekend in 2025 is still stuck in my head, and I don't think it's ever going to leave. Nothing happened in the way people expect when you tell a story like this. No chase, no screaming, no big moment where everything makes sense. It was worse than that. It was subtle, and it kept repeating, like something was following the two of us through a crowded city without ever fully stepping into the light. I drove from Melbourne, Florida, up to Charleston, South Carolina to visit my friend Mark. I hadn't seen him in years. He was in town for an internship connected to his law program, and he was staying in a house in the city. I was only there for the weekend, and I was sleeping downstairs on a couch, set up near a couple of windows. The drive was easy, no issues, and I got into Charleston with plenty of time left in the day. Mark and I ended up playing pickleball before it got dark, just catching up and doing something simple. Later that night, when everything quieted down, I went downstairs and laid out on the couch by the windows. Those windows faced another apartment building and a narrow mess of alleyways, and across the street, there was an abandoned house sitting there like it hadn't been touched in years. Even with the blinds down, you could still feel how exposed that spot was. The next morning, we played more pickleball and hung out for a bit, and then we went over to the main Charleston market. It was crowded and loud like you'd expect on a holiday weekend. We walked through the market and eventually ended up near the docks by the water. That's where we first noticed him. A man was coming down the road near the water wearing what looked like a wedding suit. Not kind of dressed up, he had the whole thing. A clean suit that looked freshly pressed, a neat bow tie, and dress shoes that didn't look scuffed up or worn down. He had long black curly hair and a tan complexion, and even though everything around us was busy, vendors, people talking, cars, music bleeding out from somewhere, he was moving like he was alone in a completely different place. He didn't walk like someone headed somewhere. It was more like he was drifting, slow, uneven, detached, like his mind wasn't fully connected to what his body was doing. He didn't look at us, didn't seem to register the crowd, and if we'd stepped off the curb, we would have walked right into him. Something in me immediately said, "Don't." I grabbed Mark's arm and told him we weren't crossing. Instead, we turned and went to the right, heading deeper into the city, and we picked up our pace without really talking about it. The guy was moving so slowly that we got space between us fast. Once we were a little farther away, I told Mark it was weird because the man didn't look homeless or disheveled. His clothes were too clean, too sharp, like he had gotten dressed for something important and then wandered out into the streets like he didn't know where he was. Mark agreed, and we both tried to laugh it off, but neither of us actually sounded amused. We kept walking, taking different streets, weaving around other people, stopping at shops. Enough time passed that the moment started to feel like something we could forget. Then, a few streets later, on another busy stretch of Charleston, we looked toward a shop and saw him again. Same suit, same bow tie, same long black curly hair, same slow, off rhythm to the way he moved. But he was far down the street, diagonal from us, and it didn't make sense how he was there. Not because Charleston is huge or impossible to navigate, but because there wasn't any obvious way he could have gotten to that spot without us seeing him at some point. We hadn't been standing still. We'd been moving, turning, cutting across streets, and he wasn't walking fast. He couldn't have caught up. I pointed him out to Mark, and we both just stared for a second. It was one of those moments where you instinctively start doing the mental math, replaying the last few minutes, trying to find the simple explanation. But nothing fit. He was just there again, Alma moving the exact same way, like the city had placed him ahead of us. We didn't follow him. We didn't confront him. We just kept going and pushed it to the back of our minds while we spent the rest of the day exploring. The next day was July 4th. That night, we watched fireworks on an island about 20 minutes away from the city. By that point, we'd mostly stopped talking about the man in the suit. We told ourselves he was just some strange guy wandering around, maybe dealing with something, maybe on something. Still, every time the thought came back, it brought the same uncomfortable feeling with it, like a small internal alarm going off for no clear reason. Later that night, we did a ghost tour we'd planned before I even came up for the trip. It was my last night in Charleston, July 5th, and the city was packed. It was one of those warm, busy Saturday nights where the streets are full, restaurant lights spill out onto the sidewalks, and the older parts of the city feel even more atmospheric after dark. After the tour ended, Mark and I walked through the main area where most of the restaurants and nightlife were. People were everywhere. At one point, a big wave of pedestrians started moving toward us, and they were walking fast enough that you had to adjust your path to avoid bumping into anyone. And right in the middle of that moving crowd, we saw him. It was the same man in the same wedding suit, drifting forward with that same slow, unsettling pace. He stood out instantly because everyone else had a normal rhythm, quick steps, small dodges, people talking and laughing, and he moved like none of it applied to him. It was like he'd been set there, and the crowd just flowed around him. What made my stomach tighten was how nobody reacted to him. Two people were walking close beside him, and he slipped between them, actually brushed through the space between them, and neither person even flinched or looked over. No annoyance, no confusion, nothing. He wasn't moving with the crowd, but he was still somehow traveling with it, like he was attached to the stream without being part of it. For a brief second, he looked in our direction. It wasn't a stare, it wasn't dramatic. Just a quick glance like he was checking where we were, and then he kept going. Still slow, still wrong. Mark and I looked at each other immediately. We didn't have to say anything. The look on his face matched exactly what I was feeling. Shock, disbelief, and that cold awareness that this wasn't normal. We stood there and watched him continue down the street until the crowd started thinning out. When it opened up a little, we could see him more clearly. He never changed his pace. He didn't speed up, didn't stop, didn't turn his head like he was looking for a place to go. He just kept drifting forward at that same unnatural speed and then slipped into a darker side street. We watched him until he turned a corner and disappeared. Neither of us panicked. We weren't running or yelling. We were just quiet in a way that felt heavy, like we were both trying to stay calm by force. It was the same man, in the same suit, showing up over and over in different parts of the city, always moving the same way, always feeling completely out of place. By then, we both knew something was wrong. We didn't know what, and we didn't have a logical explanation that felt solid, but we knew it. Later that night, we went back to Mark's house. He went upstairs to his room, and I went downstairs to the couch. I closed the blinds and tried to settle in, but I kept replaying the way that man moved through the crowd, the way people didn't seem to notice him, the way he glanced at us like he recognized us. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up to a tapping sound on the window. I didn't sit up right away. I just froze on the couch, staring into the dark, listening. The tap came again, light and deliberate, like someone using a fingernail or something small. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to move slowly, and I lifted the blind just enough to look out, down the alley at the far end. I saw the back of a man as he turned a corner. Even from that distance, the outline was familiar, the posture, the way he moved. It was him again, and right before he disappeared out of view, he looked back toward the window, toward me. Then he was gone. In the morning, I told Mark what happened. I explained the tapping and what I saw at the end of the alley. Mark is one of the most logical people I know. He doesn't lean into paranormal stuff, and he's the type to look for the simplest explanation first. But even he admitted the whole weekend felt disturbing. It wasn't just one weird sighting. It was the repetition and the timing, and how out of place the man seemed every single time. For me, it hit even harder. I'm more sensitive to that kind of thing. And I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't just coincidentally seeing the same stranger around town. It felt like the experience followed both of us, and I know it stayed with Mark too, even months later. I drove back home to Florida on July 6th, but that last image, him turning the corner in the alley and looking back, has never really faded. It's one of those moments that feels completely real and somehow unreal at the same time. And no matter how I try to explain it to myself, something about it still feels off. Story 3. I never used to be the kind of person who checks a lock twice or knows exactly which floorboard squeaks where. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't jumpy. And I definitely wasn't the type to sit in silence and listen to my own house like it was a stranger. That changed after 1 week last winter. I live alone in a small house I bought a few years ago. My life is pretty routine, almost boring on purpose. I work from home. I order groceries most of the time. I go to the gym late at night, and I keep to myself. I don't really chat with my neighbors. I don't have people dropping by. Because of how predictable everything was, it took me longer than it should have to notice that something wasn't right. It started on a Tuesday around 2:30 in the morning. I'd fallen asleep on the couch with the TV still on at a low volume. I was in that half-asleep state where you can hear things, but you're not fully aware of them yet. Then I heard a soft thud coming from the back of the house. It wasn't loud enough to make me sit up in panic. My first thought was something in the kitchen shifted or fell. Houses make noises, pipes click, wood settles. Everyone hears random sounds at night and forgets about them by morning. I muted the TV and listened for a minute. Nothing else happened. I got up, checked the back door, made sure it was locked, and went to bed. The next morning, when I opened the back door, something about it felt different. The deadbolt still worked, but the handle had a slight looseness to it, like it had been twisted too hard. It wasn't dangling off or anything, just enough that I noticed. I told myself I'd tighten it later and moved on. That night, like usual, I went to the gym around 11 p.m. I've always liked going when it's almost empty. I got home sometime between midnight and 12:30. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed my porch light was off. I always leave it on. I sat there in my car for a few seconds trying to picture myself turning it off earlier. I couldn't, but I also couldn't prove I didn't. Eventually, I convinced myself I probably shut it off without thinking. I went inside and everything looked normal. Still, I walked through every room anyway, doing this quick scan like I was checking for something out of place. It wasn't a full search, more like an instinctive sweep. I had never done that before. On Thursday morning, my alarm went off and I grabbed my phone. The battery was at 12%. I stared at it for a second, confused. I charge it every night. I clearly remembered plugging it in. When I looked closer, the cable was still connected to my phone, but the charging brick wasn't plugged into the outlet anymore. It was just hanging loose. My first explanation was that I knocked it out in my sleep, but that didn't really add up. My phone was still on the nightstand. It hadn't been in bed with me. The only thing I could tell myself was that maybe I picked my phone up half asleep during the night, tugged the charger out without noticing, and set the phone back down. Even saying it in my head sounded flimsy. That was the point where I started paying attention. That night, I stayed up later than I normally would. I turned the TV off and sat in the dark, just listening to the house. It felt stupid, like I was trying to scare myself on purpose, but I couldn't stop. Around 3 a.m., I heard slow, dull thumps coming from the back of the house. For a second, my brain tried to label it. Footsteps? No, that couldn't be right. I held my breath and listened harder, and then the sound stopped. After a while, I convinced myself it was something outside. I live in the suburbs. People walk around late. Maybe someone cut through a yard. Maybe it was nothing. The next day, I found muddy shoe prints near the back door. Not clean. Sharp prints like someone walked straight through. They were faint and smeared, like whoever made them tried to wipe them away before stepping farther inside. I couldn't make out a clear tread pattern. It looked deliberate, like someone didn't want me seeing exactly what kind of shoes they were wearing. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like I missed a step. I stood there, staring at the marks, trying to understand how they existed. I hadn't had anyone over. I hadn't been outside in muddy shoes. I crouched near the back door and inspected the lock, and that's when I noticed light scratch marks around it. They were subtle, but they looked like someone had been working at it with something thin, trying to pry or slip it. I called a locksmith and told him I thought the lock was getting worn out. I didn't mention the footprints. I don't know why. I think I didn't want to sound dramatic, even to a stranger. He came that afternoon, replaced the lock, and told me I should be fine. That night, I shoved a chair under the back door handle and locked my bedroom door when I went to sleep. I had never locked my bedroom door before then. It felt extreme, but I did it anyway. I woke up just before 4 a.m. to a soft tapping sound on my bedroom door. It wasn't a normal knock. It sounded like someone lightly touching the door with fingertips, like they were testing it. My whole body went still. I stared at the door without blinking, my eyes burning because I didn't want to miss anything. The tapping went on for a minute, maybe a little longer, and then it stopped. A few seconds later, I heard quiet steps moving away. I didn't fall back asleep. When morning came, I checked the back door first. The chair was still wedged under the handle exactly how I left it, but the back door itself was unlocked. The new lock wasn't broken, it wasn't scratched, it hadn't been forced, it had simply been turned. That was the moment it fully hit me. I hadn't imagined any of it. Someone had been inside my house while I slept, and they knew how to unlock the back door from the inside. I called the police and tried to explain everything without sounding like I was losing it. They came out, checked the house, looked around the yard, and told me there was no sign of forced entry, which was the most frustrating part because, of course, there wasn't. I had just changed the lock. One of them suggested I might have unlocked it myself and not remembered. I knew I didn't do that, but I also understood there wasn't much they could do with nothing obvious to point at. They left, and I was alone again, in the same house that suddenly didn't feel like mine. That night, I kept every light on. I stayed at the kitchen table with a knife sitting in front of me. It felt ridiculous and desperate at the same time. I didn't even try to sleep. I just waited, listening to every tiny sound the house made. Around 2 a.m., I heard something coming from the basement. The basement door is just outside the kitchen, and when I looked down the hallway, I saw it was slightly open. Not wide, just cracked enough to notice. A cold, heavy dread ran through me so fast it was like my body reacted before my thoughts did. I walked toward it slowly. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could hear it. I leaned in and looked through the crack, trying to see what the tiny gap would allow. And I swear it wasn't my imagination. At the bottom of the stairs, either on the floor or one of the lowest steps, I could make out the outline of a person standing there. I don't know if they were looking up. I don't know if they moved. The second my brain accepted what I was seeing, I slammed the basement door shut and ran out of the house. I sprinted to my car so fast my legs felt numb. I locked the doors and called 911 again, shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. Police arrived for the second time, and I stayed in one of their cars while they went inside. I watched the front door like it was the only thing keeping the house contained. A few minutes later, they came back out with a man in handcuffs. He was barefoot. He had on dark clothes that looked wrinkled, like he'd slept in them. He never looked at me once. I don't even think he noticed I was sitting in the back of the patrol car. They put him in another vehicle and shut the door. I stayed outside while more officers went back in. I refused to look at him through the window. My hands were trembling. When the officers asked me questions, my voice kept catching. I was stuttering, like my brain couldn't keep up with what was happening. It took longer than I expected for them to finish searching the house. When one of the officers finally came back out, he asked how long I'd been living there. I told him a few years. He wrote something down, then asked what time I usually went to the gym and which nights I went. I answered, and he looked back toward the house. Then he told me what they found in the basement. Behind the furnace, they found food wrappers and bottled water, and a phone charger plugged into an outlet down there. It looked like someone had been sleeping on the concrete, using old insulation as padding. He said the man hadn't spoken a single word to any of them. The main officer explained what charges the guy would probably face. But said it would ultimately be up to the district attorney. After a while, they told me I could go back inside. I did, but it didn't feel like going home. It felt like walking into a place that had been used without my knowledge. Days later, I was scrolling through my camera roll to send a friend something, and I found a photo that made my blood go cold. At first, I didn't even understand what I was looking at. Then it clicked, and my whole body reacted like I was back in that week again. It was a picture of me asleep in my bed, taken at 3:11 a.m. It was from the same night I woke up to my phone barely charged, and the charger unplugged from the wall. I just sat there staring at it, trying to process how that photo could even exist. The nightmare came rushing back in a way I didn't think was possible after the arrest. I contacted the unit listed on the incident report and told them about the picture. They asked me to come in so they could digitally transfer it as supplemental evidence. I was told that with that photo, he'd likely face additional charges, things like stalking, and it could even mean he'd have to register as a sex offender for life. That was supposed to be reassuring to hear, but none of it erases what it did to me. It doesn't undo the thought of someone being inside my house while I slept, close enough to take that picture, close enough to unplug my phone, close enough to tap on my bedroom door like he was deciding whether to come in. All I know is this: I'll never be able to walk down into a basement alone at night again for the rest of my life.